The wind cut sharp along the plains that side of Texas, carrying the sting of grit and frost through the bones of anyone not ready for its bite. By the time the sun rose pale over the dry ridgeline, the tracks of a shod horse and a single pair of boots had already scored the mud outside the town of Deadmere Bluff. She came from the north, from where the war never quite ended. Ragged coat, half-buttoned and stained, trousers patched with sinew thread. A wide-brimmed hat, too, sun-beaten to tell its original color. And the horse, taller than most cavalry beasts, its black mane plaited with what looked like threadbare service ribbons, eyes yellow as old pennies and just as cold. The girl's name was Lona Briggs. She didn't offer it, not to the barkeep she passed at dawn or the sheriff who watched her with a hand resting on his hip. No one asked. She walked like someone who could shoot her way through a storm if it meant finding shelter on the other side. She didn't ride through town. She walked beside the horse like it was a brother. No saddle, just wore tack, fraying rope, and leather loops designed for long campaigns and worse retreats. The horse bore a gun scabbard lashed to its side, and in it a rifle worn slick at the grip. She came looking for work, not because she needed it. There was enough game and enough grit in her belly to last the rest of the winter, but because she needed a place. A roof, a door she could bar from the inside, and maybe, if luck or cruelty allowed, a reason to keep holding a name. The rich cowboy lived 10 miles out, beyond the mesquite scrub and the gullies where old bones sometimes stuck up through the earth like crooked teeth. His ranch was the biggest thing for 3 counties, white-fenced, well-guarded, and quiet in the kind of way that meant something dangerous rested there. Name was Whit Seldom, not born to it, they said. Made it off blood and oil in the back of good men who'd ridden for worse causes. Owned 1,000 head of cattle and a house with more bedrooms than kin. He put out word last week, needed a housekeeper. No drunks, no criminals, no one with debts to their name or a lawman at their heels. Had to cook, sew, and clean without complaint. Had to be quiet. He didn't say anything about scars. Or women with gun-calloused hands and a horse that still smelled of cordite and winter death. Lona showed up the morning after the first snowfall, when the high ridges wore frost like war paint and the silence around the house was thick as scripture. A Mexican hand opened the gate. He looked at her, looked at the horse, and then spat near his boot heel. "You lost, Nina." She didn't speak for a long time, just looked at him with the same stillness she gave a wounded coyote or a cocked pistol. "No," she said, her voice was low and flat. "I'm the help." He barked a laugh. Senor Seldom asked for a woman, not a corpse. She shrugged and walked past. He didn't stop her. The main house rose like something torn out of a San Antonio bank, white-pillared and too proud for the dust around it. There were guards, men with shotguns and broad shoulders, who watched her approach with the same slow squint. The warhorse snorted once, stared them all down like it had seen worse than men. Seldom met her at the steps. He wore black, coal-dark shirt and a long coat trimmed in fox fur. His boots were clean. His eyes were not. "You can cook?" he asked. "Yes." "You drink?" "No." "You got anyone who'll come looking if you vanish?" "No." He looked her over like a man studying a loaded weapon. "What's your name?" "Lona." He nodded once. "You start now." "My mother's room needs airing. Cook dinner by 6. Stay out of the east wing." She nodded. He watched her walk up the steps, boots leaving thin tracks on the porch. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and ghosts. A piano sat in the foyer, strings broken. Dust covered everything that wasn't nailed down or in motion. Somewhere in the walls, rats scurried. Lona moved like she'd lived there her whole life. Like she could feel the weight of secrets behind every door and knew not to open any of them unless she had to. That night, she cooked meat and beans and baked something close to bread. Seldom didn't compliment the food. Just ate it all, eyes never leaving her face. She didn't sleep in the servants' quarters. She found a narrow room near the kitchen and barred the door with a chair. The war horse waited outside, still as wood, watching the dark. And in the hills beyond the ranch something moved, something that hadn't come for cattle or coin. It came because it had heard a name, a girl's name, spoken like a curse. Lona, and it remembered what she did. 3 days passed before the house began to speak to her, not in words, in weight. The way certain boards groaned louder when no one stood on them. How doors cracked open an inch after she'd walked by. The sound of dripping where there were no pipes. Lona didn't ask questions. She scrubbed the floors with salt and ash like her grandmother had taught her, made the beds tight, and left bread out for the rats. They didn't come near it. Nothing did. She kept the horse close, tethered near the kitchen window, where it could watch the tree line and smell the wind. On the 4th day, she found the mother's room. It hadn't been opened in years. The air inside was stale and heavy with lavender that had long since gone to mold. A portrait above the fireplace showed a pale woman with glass-blue eyes and a jaw like a judge's. She didn't smile. Lona cleaned everything. Washed the linens, beat the rugs, swept dust from corners no one had touched since Seldom's father still wore a badge. Under the bed, she found a doll with its face torn off and its hands tied behind its back. She burned it. That night, Whit Seldom came into the kitchen after dark. She was slicing onions with her boot knife, the kind meant for skinning hide. He watched her without speaking. "You fought," he said finally. Her hands didn't pause. "I survived. That war horse of yours, it's from the Frontier Corps." She nodded. "Those beasts were trained for raiding, killing. You ride it like it's yours." "It is." He took a sip from a glass she hadn't seen him pour. "You kill men." She looked up, blade still in hand. "Yes." He didn't smile, just nodded again and left. By the end of the first week, she'd mapped every corner of the house that wasn't locked. There were 10 rooms in the east wing, and she touched none. But she heard them, footsteps that didn't match the guards, breathing when the fires had all gone low. And once, the distinct metallic click of a revolver being cocked behind a door marked with a cross. Lona waited. She knew better than to press too soon. Everything came in time. Blood, secrets, reckoning. One afternoon, a child wandered into the kitchen, thin as wire and pale as dust, boy of about 7, holding a tin soldier with no legs. He said nothing, just watched her. She gave him water. He drank it without thanks and left the way he came, through a panel behind the larder she hadn't seen before. That night she followed. The panel opened onto a corridor lined in plaster and rot, old brick, root tendrils, the smell of damp and rusted iron. She walked it until it curved, then dipped, then came out behind the stables. The war horse waited there. Its ears were pinned, teeth bared. Something had tried to come close. Lona found hoofprints too light for a draft horse, but wrong for deer. Cloven, she didn't sleep that night. She sat by the stove with her rifle across her lap and listened to the wind scrape claws against the shutters. Morning came hard and colorless. A ranch hand didn't show for breakfast. Another found his boots by the trough, still laced. Blood in the snow, no body. Seldom didn't raise alarm, just told the foreman to dig another hole. Lona kept cleaning. On the 9th night, something scratched her door, not hard, just once. When she opened it, nothing stood there but the wind and a message carved into the lintel. "I remember the fort." She stared at the words until dawn, didn't blink, didn't breathe. There were no survivors from the Fort Laramie ambush. At least none who were supposed to be, but someone had seen her ride out, someone had followed, someone was still hunting. The trail she buried never stayed buried long. By the 10th morning, the snow turned pink along the eastern fence line. Buzzards circled early, lazy arcs too wide for cattle carcasses. Lona saddled her horse before sunrise, tight-lipped and pale, rifle strapped across her back like a second spine. She didn't tell Seldom where she was going. He didn't ask, only nodded once as she passed through the yard, his eyes rimmed red from a night he hadn't slept. She followed the vultures. Half a mile from the gate, she found what they'd left. A coyote strung by its hind legs from a cottonwood, throat slit clean. Beneath it, etched into the frozen mud with something sharp and deliberate, were the same words she'd seen carved in her doorway. I remember the fort. The tree bark bore scorch marks, black as old powder burns. Lona ran a gloved hand over them, her fingers pausing on one in particular, small, ring-shaped, a bullet hole. She spat once, wiped her hand on her coat, and turned back. She cooked rabbit that night, tough and salted hard. The child came back while she was deboning it, face blank, toy soldier in hand again. This time he spoke. You're gonna kill him. She didn't respond. You smell like the fort, he said, like fire and dead men. What's your name? She asked, voice dry. He shook his head. I forget. Where do you sleep? He pointed toward the east wing. The one Seldom had warned her about. She fed him quietly. He took the meat in both hands and ate without chewing. When he finished, he wiped his mouth on his sleeve and crawled back into the shadows behind the cupboard. That night, Lona stood in the yard for hours, Warhorse tied beside her. Watching, waiting, she could feel it, the weight of pursuit, like something circling in the trees just beyond firelight. A week after the coyote, another ranch hand vanished. This one was tougher, ex-cavalry, knew how to track and shoot. They found only his hat, floating in the well. Seldom posted more guards, doubled rations. Hired 2 bounty men from the south who arrived with dynamite and long rifles. They drank too much, laughed too loud, died the same night. One never made it to his bunk. The other was found in the parlor chair, eyes gone, mouth packed with salt. That morning, Lona asked to clean the east wing. Seldom stared at her like she'd grown horns. You think what's out there came from in here? She didn't answer. He gave a slow nod. Fine, you see something you don't like, burn it. Just don't come running to me after. She opened the first room at dusk. It was empty but for a single chair and a noose looped from the ceiling beam. Dust coated everything like it had tried to bury the past. The next room held a pile of dolls, each with nails driven through their faces. Another had paintings turned to face the wall and beds made up in the shape of men who never came home. She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. At the end of the hall, a locked door. She pressed her ear against it and heard breathing. Slow, ragged, too low to be human. She didn't open it. That night, the wind came stronger than ever, howling through the rafters like a woman keening. The warhorse stomped until dawn, its eyes glassy with rage. Lona sat awake by the hearth, boots unlaced, rifle in hand, remembering. The fort had burned for 3 days, not from enemy fire, but from what they'd done there. The prisoners, the experiments, the children locked in cells beneath the chapel. She remembered the smell of roasted flesh, the scream of men who couldn't stop the blaze, the way her commanding officer had whispered into her ear before cutting his own throat. They'll follow the strongest, and you lived. Now they had followed, and the house was no longer just a place to hide. It was the last stand. The snow grew deeper. It muffled everything, footsteps, gunshots, even breath. What had once been a ranch full of noise now moved like a graveyard under frost. Lona kept the fires lit and the kitchen warm, but the air inside the house turned thick and stale, like the rooms didn't want to let her leave. The locked door in the east wing remained unopened. Each morning she checked it. Each night she listened. The breathing grew louder, more ragged. Sometimes it gurgled, like something drowning slowly behind wood. Seldom stopped eating with the house staff. He took his meals alone now in the upstairs study. When she brought him food, he barely looked at her. You were part of what happened, he said one night, voice dull with whiskey. At Laramie. She didn't deny it. My brother was there, he added. Private Jonah's Seldom Medical Corps. They sent back his dog tags, not his body. She stood silent in the doorway. He was soft, Seldom muttered, liked animals. Drew birds in the margins of his journals. He wouldn't have hurt anyone. She met his eyes. Everyone hurt someone there. That ended the conversation. The child returned again, this time older, face sharper, hair cropped, still barefoot. He no longer played with the broken soldier. Now he carried a strip of leather tied around his wrist. "Did you burn it?" he asked her. She shook her head. "Not yet." "You should before it gets out." She knelt by him. "What is it?" He blinked slowly. "The memory. You left it behind, but it didn't die. It grew teeth." She touched the leather bracelet. Whose was this? He smiled too wide. "Mine." He dissolved into ash before her eyes. Not smoke, not mist, ash. Fine, black, and warm. The warhorse screamed that night. It tore through its hitching post and kicked open the barn doors, trampling 3 men who tried to stop it. Lona followed barefoot through the snow, chasing its prints into the ravine where the first ranch hand had vanished. She found it standing over a hole torn into the earth. Fresh, circular, something had tunneled up, not down. The edges were scorched, no sign of claw or shovel, just burnt roots and melted snow. The horse stamped, ears back. Foam laced its mouth. She aimed her rifle into the dark and fired once. The report echoed like cannon fire. From the hole came nothing but silence. By dawn, the guards began to desert. First 2, then 5 more. They left horses saddled and food untouched, said they wouldn't die for a man who kept devils in the basement. Lona didn't blame them. She spent the day dragging salt into the halls. Made lines across every doorway, traced old sigils into the windows with soot and ash. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head as she worked, low and firm. "If the dead knock, don't answer. If they cry, don't weep. And if they ask for their name, lie." At sundown, she stood before the locked door and whispered, "Jonah's Seldom." The breathing stopped, then something on the other side laughed, not loud, not human. That night the last child came to her. A girl no older than 8, hair braided, missing one eye. She didn't speak, just held out a burned doll. Lona took it gently. The doll was old, stitching tight, eyes made of buttons. Around its neck, a medical tag. "Jonah's," it read. When she looked up, the girl was gone. Lona did not sleep. She boiled water, lit every lamp. She wrote something in her own blood on the hearthstone and placed the doll in the middle, and she waited. At midnight, something began to scratch at the windows, not with claws, with nails. She did not rise. The warhorse stood rigid outside the door, steam rising from its flanks like smoke from battlefields past. The lamps dimmed. The house creaked, and in the east wing the locked door opened. The sound was delicate, a latch lifting, a hinge sighing, but it cut through the house like a blade. Lona stood. Her rifle was already slung, her breath even. She moved barefoot through the dark, each step measured, deliberate. The house felt colder than ever, walls sweat-slick and pulsing like muscle. The east wing loomed ahead, hollow with silence. The door stood open. She entered. Inside was a corridor she hadn't seen before. Narrow, walls warped from damp, ceiling lower than it should have been. The floorboards creaked in rhythm, as if something ahead was walking just out of sight. She followed. At the end stood a single room. No light, no sound, just rot. The air inside hung heavy with mold and iron. A cot in the corner, soiled and sagging. Chains bolted to the wall. An old lantern burned on the floor, flame sickly blue. And in the center him, Jonah's Seldom, or what was left of him. He stood upright, bones showing through the skin like pale roots. His face was half shadow, half scab, teeth chattering in an endless, stuttering grin. One arm was gone. The other dragged something wrapped in blood-wet linen. He didn't speak, just raised his head toward her, eyes milky and full of flame. Lona didn't hesitate. She shot once. The bullet passed through him like smoke. He advanced. She stepped back, aimed for the head this time, fired again. Same result. Smoke, cinders, a smell like burnt wheat and gun oil. He dropped the linen. It unspooled into something not human, child-sized, boneless, twitching. She kicked it into the corner and backed toward the hall. Jonas opened his mouth and screamed. Not sound, memory, pain, fire, screams, the children crying as the barracks burned, the officers drunk on cruelty, on power. The smell of boiling skin, her own hands breaking open crates of phosphorus shells, orders scribbled in blood. She dropped to one knee, rifle clattering, but she didn't close her eyes. Enough, she whispered. The memory broke. He vanished. Only ash remained. She staggered back into the corridor. Her ears rang, her hands shook, but she moved. Alive. Outside, the wind had stopped. Seldom was waiting in the parlor when she returned, pistol on the table beside him, half a bottle in his hand. "You saw him." "Yes." He poured another glass, didn't drink it. "He's been here a long time." "I know. I didn't want him dead. I wanted him punished." She sat across from him, war horse pressing its face to the window behind her. "You kept him in chains," she said. "That wasn't justice." He looked down at his glass. "I remember my brother laughing, picking flowers for our mother. He didn't deserve the fort." "No one did." They sat in silence. Then Seldom reached for his pistol and slid it across the table to her. "You can take the house. I've had enough." She stared at it. "I don't want the house." "Then burn it." He stood, walked upstairs, and didn't come down. That night, Lona made one final round. She salted the baseboards, packed her bag, left the door to the east wing open. She kissed the war horse's forehead, then she lit a match. By dawn, the house was gone. A black scar on the land, smoking. Only the horse remained, waiting by the gate, and Lona, standing beside it, watching the sun rise without blinking. She still remembered the fort, but now something else remembered her. The house didn't burn clean. By noon the day after, flames still licked the foundation like they were starving. Smoke coiled into the clouds and stayed there, black and unmoving, like the sky itself held its breath. Lona didn't leave right away. She camped beneath the charred arch of what had once been the front gate. The warhorse stayed beside her, tail swishing, nostrils flaring at the ash still drifting on the wind. Seldom was nowhere to be found. If he'd burned with the house, the fire had swallowed every trace. Not a tooth, not a buckle, not a scream, but something had crawled free. That night, coyotes ringed the ruins, not howling, watching. Lona sharpened her knife by the campfire and ignored them. The horse didn't sleep. At dawn, hoofbeats approached from the ridge, not cavalry, not raiders, U.S. Marshals. 3 of them, riding clean and quiet, faces set like funeral stones. They dismounted without a word. "You Lona Briggs?" the first asked. She nodded. He unfolded a sheet of parchment. "We have a warrant from the federal government. Signed by the Attorney General. You are to be taken in for questioning regarding the Fort Laramie incident, the deaths at Deadmere Bluff, and the disappearance of Whit Seldom." She didn't flinch. He looked up. "You going to come quiet?" "I ain't going." "You'll hang." She stood, maybe. The second marshal reached for his cuffs. The war horse moved first. It lunged without a sound, hooves splitting the earth. The first man was thrown back before he could draw. The second shouted, hand caught in his belt. The third tried to aim, but Lona was already on him, knife slicing across his wrist. Gunfire tore the stillness. When the dust cleared, 2 marshals lay bleeding in the scrub. The third, young, barely shaven, stood panting, both hands raised. "Please," he whispered, "I didn't come to die." Lona stared at him, her blade dripped. I did, she said. He ran. She didn't chase him. Instead, she turned west. No one stopped her. Word spread. They said a woman with a ghost horse and scorched boots rode through the Badlands, took work where she could, kept to herself. They said she could shoot a crow from the sky at 200 yards, that she never laughed, that she only slept beside rivers, and that wherever she went, things caught fire. People talked about justice, about vengeance, but those were just words. Lona knew better. Justice was a thing men built with rules and ropes and papers. What she carried was older. She rode into the mountains next, high and cold. Snow so deep it drowned whole cabins. She worked a trapline for a dying widow, helped a girl birth a breech calf in the blizzard. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She slept with her rifle in her arms and the warhorse always facing the door, but the dreams came anyway. The fort, the fire, children crying behind stone walls. That breathing from behind the door, Jonas's eyes wide and wet with something that looked like blame. One night she heard voices in the snow. They weren't near, just drifting. The words were not in English. She rose, found no tracks, but left the camp anyway. She moved higher into the pass, found a cavern. Spent days inside, painting on the walls with ash and blood, symbols her grandmother taught her when death walked the ridgelines. And on the last night of the coldest month, she saw something waiting at the cave mouth. Not Jonah's, something worse. The man who'd ordered the burn, Colonel Avery. He stood clean, boots polished, coat tight, eyes gleaming like ice. He didn't speak, she didn't reach for her rifle. She stood and walked out into the snow, barefoot. They faced each other, inches apart. His mouth opened, not to speak, to scream. She kissed his cheek, and he collapsed into bones. Lona stood alone again, and the cave behind her sealed shut. Spring came late to the mountains. Snow held the ridgelines like a grudge. When it finally melted, the river swelled, and the wind carried new names. Lona rode down through the thaw, clothes stiff with smoke and pine sap, hair tied back with sinew thread. The warhorse was leaner now, but still watchful, steps sure on rock no other beast would risk. She came to a valley where the soil was black and soft, where widows grew onions and slept with knives beneath their pillows. A mining camp had bloomed there, crude and fast, full of men who drank their pay and beat their mules. She took a job as a cook. No one knew her name. They learned not to ask. She salted her own water, burned her trash, carved sigils into the cooking stones. At night, she walked the perimeter barefoot, pressing her palm to the earth, listening. Feeling whatever she'd carried down from the mountains, whatever had trailed her since Fort Laramie, was quieter now, but not gone. Sometimes she'd wake to the sound of weeping in the hills, not hers, not anyone's. Memory itself had found voice. She wrote nothing, but she watched. One morning, a man in a gray coat rode into the valley, older, southern drawl, eyes rimmed with red like a hound, called himself Carrick, said he was looking for his daughter. She wore braids, he told Lona over black coffee. Liked horses, had a doll named Wren, went missing after the fort burned. Lona said nothing, just handed him a second cup. You seen anything like that? No. He stared at her a long time. Funny thing, he murmured, you got her eyes. She didn't answer. That night the warhorse trampled his tent. In the ashes they found bones, too small for Carrick, a child's ribcage. Wrapped in canvas marked with military grade. Lona didn't wait for questions. She packed her things before dawn. Before she left, the widow who ran the boarding house handed her a tin badge. This was my husband, she said, before they shot him for turning evidence. Lona took it, didn't pin it on, rode west again, through dry gulches, through dust and rust and sky. Stories followed, they always did. Of a ragged woman with a war horse that could walk across rivers, who left crosses burned into the dirt where bad men died. Of a girl who'd lived through a massacre and never once looked back. of fire that trailed her like smoke from a loaded gun, and some said justice came with her. But others said justice died at the fort, that what walked now was something else. Something forged in silence, raised by ghosts and fed by the weight of things no one had the right to remember. Lona kept riding, past towns with no names, past graves with no stones, toward something only she could see. And behind her always, the warhorse followed,